Welcome back to Inner Voice of Knowing. I'm always excited, but I'm particularly happy today to have Shayne Brian from Bad Boys Media. And you may actually know that title because Shayne is actually the producer of this particular podcast. And I've always had the greatest of respect for you, Shayne. You're such a man of heart and authenticity, professionalism. But there was something that I saw that you posted
Mm.
with a story about something in your background that just made me sit up and go, I need to actually have you on as a guest because this is a really worthwhile story, to be heard and to be shared and to learn from as well. So, welcome to the podcast, Shayne,
Thank
who's also
you.
going to produce this episode.
I'll make it sound really good. No. Um, yeah. I don't talk about it too much, but it's really part of part of my whole journey.
Yeah.
And it, it's easy to say, oh, I've got a story where I was at the lowest point in my life, and you know what? Everybody goes to a low point in their life at
Yes.
some point in their life, and they you know, hit rock bottom and then they work their way back up. And, the basic guts of my story is no different to everyone else's story.
Yeah.
The circumstances, are a little different.
We're all heroes at times in our own lives, aren't we? And I
Yeah.
love the fact, Shayne, that you said, you know, the old.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, I can remember things in my past, even 7, 8 years ago, but it feels like a past life
Yeah.
because I feel so different in the present moment where I am now.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I mean, I should preface my whole story. And this is I haven't really told my story too many times, so this is probably one of the first times that that it will really be out there. I'm currently a content director for a radio station. In fact, four radio stations across northern Tasmania. So, and it's been a very interesting journey for me because I started in the 90s, yes, early 90s in
Yeah.
radio in Rockhampton. And I was I was just in promotions. I wasn't on air, and I really wanted to be on air. And someone said to me, I said, "Oh, can I have a try at being on air?" And they said, "Oh, look, you really haven't got the voice for it. I'm sorry."
Really?
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah. Now oh gosh, how old am I? I was 23 at the time,
Yeah.
and it gutted me. And you know what? I lived with that for years and years and years. In fact, most of my life I lived with that.
Oh, you took it on board.
Yeah, I took it on board.
Yeah, we're really impressionable at that age, aren't we? So when
Yeah.
someone sort of in the know says something like that, yeah, it can hit hard.
And you know what? It wasn't until I met my wife, Tanya,
Mhm.
that she said, "Oh, are you in radio? Because you've got a great voice for radio." And
Yeah.
it was at that point that I just went, wow, like I've been holding on to that for so long. And so that was kind of it took me out of the radio area, and I wanted to get back into radio, which I did through, and we'll talk about it. An incredible journey of manifesting
Uh-huh.
is really what it was. I had my goal in mind and my heart set on a role. In fact, I wanted to be a radio announcer. I was like,
Uh-huh.
that's it. I'm going to be a radio announcer. And I bypassed that completely. I mean, I got it and I am, but I'm also now, a content director looking after other radio announcers,
And
which,
so much more that's also in your
yeah,
back pocket. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's the overview. I guess where do we start?
Did you always want to be in radio? Like when you were younger, even, like in your teens or be heard, or was it just about being heard, or what was it?
I don't know what I really wanted to do. I grew up in a really Pentecostal Christian background.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to be, I did everything, drama, the whole lot,
Yeah. So it was there.
It was there, it
Yeah.
was there. And there were a couple of things like, like oh, you haven't got a voice for radio. I had I was in a band, and I was the lead singer of the band, and I did a battle of the bands, and I got up on stage, and we sang, we performed, sang my heart out. And Angry Anderson from Rose Tattoo was one of the judges. And he
Okay.
said, "Oh, you guys were great. But singer, I wouldn't give up your day job."
Oh my God, how heart-wrenching.
Now the funny thing is, I've had plenty of conversations with Angry since then, and him and
Yeah.
I get on really well. And I just said, I just want you to know that you told me to give up singing. I said, and I never sung after that.
Oh,
He just went,
Shane, really?
he just
Wow.
went, wow. He said, I've just saved you from a life of heartache as a singer. He said, because no one wants to be a singer. At least you're in radio now. But it's funny that we take things on board so
So
deeply.
someone says you don't have the voice for radio,
Yeah.
and clearly you do. Like
Yeah. Yeah,
clearly,
right.
but it impacted you and
Yeah.
um, changed that guiding mechanism that's inside of you. And
Yeah.
then, again, you're doing and you're up front doing something that you love, and someone that's got that power says, "Don't
Yep.
give up your day job," and it changes your course
It does.
again.
Which I'm kind of glad because I don't think I really would want to be a singer on stage every single night. But I guess the point is that we say things to kids all the time,
Yeah.
just off the cuff, and how we should actually be thinking about what we say to our kids because, kids are so impressionable.
The power in the spoken word
Yeah.
and how something is delivered and what's actually being said,
Yeah.
yeah, is
Yeah.
very
Absolutely.
impactful. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I went on a bit of a journey in my life and, one thing led to another thing. And I never really had a direction of,
Mhm.
I built up a great career in marketing, learnt everything I needed to know in marketing. I was a marketing manager, shopping center manager. Like I did the whole gambit.
Yeah.
And then when the whole digital age hit, I had to recalibrate myself and go, oh, well, I can't do just normal marketing now. I've got to do this below the line marketing. And so that completely changed. I had to relearn. And I look at these kids now that are just pick it up, and it's just
Oh, my,
crazy how
my
they are.
grandsons and grandchildren from the youngest, they just pick and start swiping and
I know.
just crazy.
What with
And
that? What's with that?
yeah, I entered that phase of, I remember my first computer being like an absolute box.
Yeah.
And now we've got these mobile phones. It's been a big leap. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the music side of things never really left me though. I've always
Mhm.
had this this passion for the music. It's like if I'm not going to sing or if I'm not going to play the music, I want to do something to help in the music industry.
Yeah.
So after, my father passed away and I was really in a place of I don't know what to do and I started a record label. And I had some other people in the label that were the investors in the label and I found out later that they really just wanted to get their daughter a record contract and, make her
Yeah.
famous. But I managed to do a lot of things. I met a lot of people through that. It was just a wonderful period, and until it wasn't.
Were they big risks, Shane? Like, did you have contacts in the music industry, or was this one of those leaps of, I'm
It was
just
one of
going
those
to do what I want
leaps.
to do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was one of those leaps. I met a lot of people in that time that I can still call up now, and you know I remember I remember really vividly, I was at a music conference and at the table, I'm sitting there having breakfast, and at the table was one of the biggest promoters in Australia, Michael Chugg.
Hmm.
There was Molly Meldrum,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There was a guy by the name of Seymour Stein, who was from Warner Music, who was the guy that discovered Madonna.
Wow.
All these people at a breakfast table, and you know, Molly sitting there eating his cornflakes with his hands, just being a typical Molly. And it was I just it was a pinch myself moment because I just went, how did I get here? Like to in front of all of these people, just asking random questions and having a chat. It was just a general chat,
Yeah.
and so I count myself really lucky that all of that happened. Then the whole record label just blew up. It just impacted, completely exploded.
Yeah.
Um, and the other directors left. We had a big GST bill. I was left holding the bag. And I just went, well, I just can't do this. I can't keep going. We had bills. I just went, well, you know what? I've got to go bankrupt. And so I did. Now, that wasn't the low point in my life. At that point, the ATO contacted me and said, "Yeah, well, look, you know what, you owe all this GST money. You've got to pay it back." And I said, "Look, I'm bankrupt. There's nothing I can do." And they said, "Well, I'm sorry, but bankruptcy doesn't negate a GST bill."
Did you feel like a failure, Shane, or did you just, I don't like, how did you approach it?
Yeah, I felt like a failure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In fact, the stress that was involved with that,
Mm.
um, I lost my hearing in one of my ears. Yeah,
Wow.
completely deaf in one ear. And I remember driving along the M1 between Gold Coast and Brisbane,
Yeah.
and everything just started spinning around me, and I felt sick, and to the point where I had to pull over because I was going to have a car accident. You
Yeah.
know, the stress hit me that badly. I would wake up in the morning, I'd fall out of bed and crawl to the toilet to vomit.
Oh,
Like I couldn't even stand up. That's how bad my body was taking it
yeah.
to
The
that
the
point.
impact of
The
the
impact.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So I contacted someone and said, look, I've got this GST bill. They're like, well, you're going to have to pay it. I said, well,
With
it's
what?
it's $100,000. I can't pay it. And they said, well, if it's over $30,000, and note to self, if you've got a tax bill that's over $30,000,
Yeah.
do something to pay it because you'll be targeted. Um, they said, well, you're going to have to do something. So I contacted the ATO and they said, well, you know, we'll sit down and talk with you. They did, and they said, well, look, since you can't pay it, we're going to fine you 100 cents in the dollar, which means at that point, I don't owe 100,000, I owe $200,000.
And that's not really helpful, is it?
No, no, it's not. So I met around this time. I met Tanya, which was the biggest blessing in my life, and she went through this whole process with me, and it's a
In
wonder.
first meeting you.
Yeah, well, no, I didn't just come out and go, "Oh, by the way,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've got this
Yeah.
issue." We got to know one another, and eventually it came out, and she said, "Well, we'll work through it." 5 years in and out of the courts,
Five
and
years.
5 years, 5 years.
How
I
do you
just know
face each day
it was.
knowing that the next day is not necessarily instantly better in what's happening for you in your world? What gets you up and still going, Shane?
Well, both myself and Tanya are really highly motivated people. Like
Mm.
we get up and we do things. And during this time, you know, I together with Tanya, created a magazine, called Sage Magazine. It was great. It was very, it was a beautiful magazine. We did a lot of people were downloading it, reading it. We had a lot of interest, and someone said you should start a radio station, which I did. It was called Soul Traveller Radio, and we had 100,000 listeners, in just in a year. It was amazing, the results of that, but it wasn't enough to. It was more of a passion project for us. It wasn't.
Yes, but even for you to be going through something that
Yeah,
many face, but most people don't,
yeah,
right? That level of stress and, what you owing doubling,
yeah.
and you still are drawing on your drive and creativity and what can be created now, and having that passion is amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I
Yeah.
look back now and just go, you know, like how did I go? How did I wake up every day and face that? And it was just simply because, I know that I had the support there of Tanya. I had, you know, my own inner voice of knowing that, hey, everything's going to be okay.
Well, I was just going to say that, Shayne, because you'll playfully at times go, oh, inner voice of knowing. But I was going to say, did you feel like you had that inner voice that was just, okay, here's this next aspiration or, creation to move towards?
Yeah, absolutely. I had this knowing inside that everything was
Mm.
going to be okay,
Yeah.
but nothing prepared me for what was next.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So,
listeners are probably going, isn't that enough?
yeah.
Like, yeah.
So I really remember the day that I came home from court and I just said to Tanya, look, I just can't do this anymore.
Hmm.
I just can't keep going every single month. I think I've just got to go, look, you know what? Guilty, just, you know. So, court date was set. Um, Tanya was ready to go. My two eldest kids were going to be there as well. And I thought, okay, they'll probably say, you know, let's work out a plan to pay this back, um, do some community service. I got to the courthouse, and the judge turned around and said, 9 months. No,
Oh,
sorry, 2 years on the top.
I've got all this energy washing all over me. Like, how much can one person bear?
Yeah.
And
And then
so you've
she
got your
said,
beautiful wife and you've got your children, and you're like, okay, I'm going to fess up, but it'll be community service. And,
yeah,
but 2 years?
2 years and 9 months,
Yeah.
basically, you don't have to do the full 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those surreal moments where it's just like, is this really happening? And I looked over at my family and they were just in tears.
Yeah.
And yeah, the hardest part was, when they turned around and put the handcuffs on me and I got to say goodbye.
And you're not a criminal.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just went for something that didn't work out and
Got left holding a bill that
got
couldn't
left
pay.
holding a bill that then got doubled. And
Yeah. They
wow.
call it fraud. That's what they call it. They say, you know, you took this money from GST and, without the intention of paying it back. So therefore you have to
Yeah.
do your time. Um, gosh, that started a really hard 9 months for me. And not just for me, but for my family too.
Yeah.
You know, they were on the outside, not knowing what's going on. They were, you know, facing a year without any income except for what Tanya brought in,
And without you,
and without me.
like it's, yeah.
Um,
And not being feeling helpless. They must have just felt helpless, because
yeah,
there's nothing you can really do
no,
other than just, love on you from a distance, but there's nothing that will sort of fix the situation. That must have been, I can't even imagine, on top of everything else that you've gone through.
it was tough, and and I don't want to dwell too much on it. I will, tell a couple of stories because everyone loves a good prison story every now and then. But it was a lot of people say to me, "Oh, that you would have just been sent to something wouldn't have even been prison."
Oh, you've got the TV in there and yeah. It was prison, Shane?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to Wakehole, which was the a high security, maximum security prison. You know, I
Right.
enter into I guess a wing that was for the newcomers.
Yeah.
I hadn't even been able to speak to the whole time I was in the police lockup. I couldn't speak to Tanya, hadn't been able to speak to her. Was in the this newcomers wing. Everyone seemed okay. There was
Yeah.
no sort of like nothing too untoward. Then they said, "Oh, well, you can ring Tanya. You can ring
Uh-huh.
your wife. So anyway, I rang, and it was the first time I'd spoken to her for ages, and
Is that joyous but hard? Like
it
all in
was it
one?
was really
Yeah.
hard because I wanted to know so much. I wanted to know that she was okay, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Are you okay? You okay?" She's like, "Don't worry about me. Are you okay?"
Yeah.
And I made the mistake of saying, "Yep, look, I'm fine. Look, they're really good in here. It's not that bad." That afternoon, my name comes over the loudspeaker.
Yeah.
Um, Pack up your belongings. We're moving you to another area. I went, oh, okay. Where are they taking me to? Well, they took me to the Bronx. They call it the Bronx for a reason. This wing was that bad that the guards didn't even want to walk out into the main area
I'm trying to sort of, why would they take you there for what you were in for, Shane?
because I said that on the phone. I said
And
everything's
someone's
fine.
heard. They're
They've
they're
listened.
listening.
They've
And
listened in.
they've
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
yeah. Yeah. It was, I look back now and just go, how did I even survive this? Um, it was tough. I mean, I saw stuff that I'd never seen before in my life,
Yeah.
guys sitting around just taking heroin, just passing a needle one to another. Um, One guy that had all the toast and wouldn't let anyone else eat it, otherwise you fear for your life. I mean, all this sort
Yeah.
of stuff, and I know that it was that I look back now and go, well, I was meant to see all of that. Yeah, I was scared. I could have had anything happen to me.
Yeah.
I got through that first period. I was there for one night. They went, right, you've seen the bad side. Right, now we're going to move you to the workers unit. And they moved me on to the next unit, and it seemed okay there. I managed to get into the laundry and start doing work and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I still didn't sort of get to really understand. Even going through that, I didn't see how bad it was.
Yeah.
So there's two things that you don't actually say when you're in prison,
Hmm.
okay? Or two things you don't actually do. You never drop the soap.
Oh
Anyway,
God.
I did once. That was quite funny. I dropped the soap, and the guy I was in with, he just laughed and he just said, "You didn't." I said, "Yeah, I did." Anyway, it was fine.
Did you
But
leave the soap?
yeah, I left it. Uh, but the second thing you don't do is you don't ask people what they're in for, and I did,
Well, you
and
wouldn't know. It's not like they give you a
I
set of
didn't
rules
know.
to go
I
in
didn't.
with. You don't know. Yeah.
And I'm standing there, and this guy in the unit, he's across from me, just folding clothes.
Hmm.
And I said, "Oh, what are you in for, you idiot?" And he said, "I killed someone."
Oh.
And I went, "Oh, what did you do?" It's
Oh
like,
my God.
and he said, "I stabbed him." No, sorry. He said, I hit him with a sledgehammer. And I went, "Oh," and he said, and then I went back to his place afterwards because he was still okay. I
Yeah.
hid in the cupboard. And I came out when he was asleep and I shot him 3 times with a sawn-off shotgun. I just went, I know this story. I know this case. It was all over the news. I went, stupidly, I thought you did it 10 times. And
Oh,
his eye twitched. So I shot him another 7 times just to make sure he was gone. Now, I mean, this is where I was.
yeah.
And it was at that point I just went, I know where I am now.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say
Oh,
that must have
wow.
been so confronting that
Yeah,
I'm in prison
yeah,
with
yeah.
people that have done some really horrific
Horrible things.
things.
Some horrible
And
things.
did you look at him differently? Did you sort of feel differently about him after that? Or was it more just a disconnect, but a realization and sort of that awakening of
Yeah, I was
where I'm at?
nervous. I was very nervous. I was,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sharing a cell with someone I have no idea who they are. It could have been that guy, Luckily it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was another guy,
And you
who
didn't ask him
seemed
what he
okay.
what he was in for
No, well, we
after that.
talked. We talked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then I started sharing a cell with another guy who I found out went in 3 days before me, and we developed a friendship,
Hmm.
in there, and had the same judge, had the same length of time. I'm pretty sure she just copied what he got and just gave it to me.
Yeah.
Um, we ended up at the farm, which was like a low security. We knew we would probably get there anyway, but it just took a bit of time in getting there, a couple of months. And we
Yeah,
got there.
but everything you have to go through
Oh,
just
everything.
just to get
Yeah.
to, yeah.
And even there, it wasn't without incident.
Yeah.
Um, I became the head chef, because no one messes with the chef. So
Okay.
I was just like, right, I know what I'm going to do. Um, Even when I was there, I was continually writing and continually studying, and started a uni course, and just wanted to continually just keep my mind active because I didn't want to fall into that trap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hey, it was a 9 months, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. I really wouldn't. But I see what they go through there, and I look at it and go, there's no rehabilitation.
Yeah.
They say there's rehabilitation, but there's no rehabilitation. It's a holding pattern.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget this. The day that I left, the security guard said to me, "I'll see you next time.
Oh, wow.
I'll see you next time." And I just said,
Did the security guard know what you were in for
"Yeah,
and
yeah,
still said, I'll see you next time?
yep, yep." Because
That
they've
just
got
goes
this
to show how
mentality.
many people do the revolving door.
Yeah, yeah. And
Wow.
I'm just like, no, no, you won't. No, you won't. So I
So
came out, Tanya met
already,
me.
already you've gone through so much, more than
Yeah,
what most people can go through. So listeners that are listening feeling like someone's pissing them off or their job isn't great, or, let's get some perspective here about what
you
adversity
were.
really, really is. And, kudos to you for continuing to stay with that connection within, and I'm not going to fall into this, and moving forwards. But a 9 month sentence makes me think, well, it takes 9 months to grow a new life. Were you different in a positive way coming out from that, or did that take time?
It's funny you should say that because through that whole process, Tanya, she's a big believer in science, and she just went, "Oh, 9 months," you know, and we would jokingly say, "Oh, the first trimester's over," you
Yeah,
know. Now you're into the second trimester, and then the third trimester was so bad because I just wanted to get the baby out of me.
yeah,
And there was no difference, and that was the longest part, was that last 3 months.
yeah,
In fact, the last week just dragged on, and I'm just like, I just can't do this. And I remember, Tanya came and picked me up, and we went. She just said, "We're not going home. I'm
Mhm.
taking you down the beach for a couple of days where you can
Beautiful.
just, you know, decompress um, before anything else. And so we did. And you know, it's a foreign thing after 9 months being
Well, I
locked
was going
away.
to say,
Right?
you've been immersed
Yeah.
into a world that you don't imagine you're ever going to be immersed in. And coming out must feel really foreign because you're changed. You're not the same person that went in, but you're coming back to where you
Yeah.
came from. I did an episode, you know, that walking between the worlds of change.
Yeah.
It must be a bit like that. So how beautiful
It
Tony
was. It
said,
was. It was
let's
a real
take you to a
rebirth.
place that
Yeah.
will nurture you back in.
No,
Yeah.
it was. It was. And, you know, we were there for a couple of days. We went back home, and within 2 days, I was back to. I'm like, right, I know what we need to do. I'm going to start, you know, doing podcasts and helping people, you know, create podcasts.
This
Are you there?
drive and this creative inspiration that comes from inside of you, Shayne, did you have that as a young child? Is it like, is that just a natural part of who Shayne is?
Yeah, I think I've always been a fairly driven person.
Yeah.
Um, but I also look at I also had a I feel like I had a karma, and I know this sounds really you know, well, it probably doesn't sound strange to you because you know all about
Not
it,
to me, but yeah.
but it was almost like I lived my whole life up to that point where I needed to get rid of that karma, that bad
To
karma,
clear that debt
and cleared it.
and
And
learn
I
and
cleared it.
learn the lesson
Yeah,
so it doesn't get repeated.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask the
Yeah.
question. Do you think there was that knowing, whether it was conscious or not, that that's what it was, and hence you staying so positive, even though there were times where you're falling out of bed and this, you know, because the human condition of stress doesn't change the strength though that's inside of us, you know.
I'll tell you what I did really see in there. What I saw was myself.
Wow.
Uh,
In
And
what way, Shayne?
because uh, you're spending so much time on your own, you
Yeah.
know, you hear about people going to Varanasi, you know, and doing a meditation retreat and going, okay, well, you're not going to talk. Then what's the Vipassana, you know, where you don't talk for 10 days and then you come
Yeah.
out, like this was 9 months of every night just there with myself,
Yeah.
my own thoughts. And I would have a window of like 15 minutes where I could call Tanya and then I'm back to my own self.
Makes me think of alchemy, you know, that
Yeah.
extreme pressure
Yeah. Yeah.
to create something,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, something new.
And I do, I had a lot of really vivid dreams in there and things like I went through, even back to my childhood when I was so entrenched in the church and the pressure that they put you under and the
Yeah.
fire and the brimstone.
Yeah.
And I had this dream where everybody in the church was had their back to me, but
Wow.
my best friend was looking at me, and I knew at that point that that was love,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
so it's little things like that that just go, wow, I can
Pushing you on.
really, yeah.
Whew.
And they're the
Was
kind
there
of things I had.
anything in that upbringing, um, that religious upbringing, was there anything that seeded that was something positive? Do you think, in terms of, um, you know, there must be something of truth wrapped then in all that fire, brimstone, and guilt and all that sort of stuff? Was there anything,
Uh,
do you think, that landed, that seeded,
yeah,
helped you
yeah.
through any of this process?
Yeah, I feel like it was actually a rebellion against everything that they taught me. And the
Yeah.
one thing that they always used to say was, you know, oh, you can't take any glory for things that you do. You know, you've got to give the glory to God. You know, because otherwise that's ego, you know. And so
Yeah.
this was a stripping back of that ego to the point where I was able to accept um the true I,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I remember a really interesting uh, story that happened when I was in there, and it was I wanted to start a just a meditation class for a few people
Mhm.
that wanted to learn meditation,
Were
and
you meditating before that? Because I know
yeah,
Tanya's very
yeah,
spiritually
yeah.
minded. Yeah.
And I'm not a meditator. I don't go right. I've got to meditate. Tanya will do
Yeah.
it every night. You know,
Yeah.
she's got a really strong discipline there. I I wanted to do this, and Tanya's like, okay, find a place. And I went, okay, what about the library? That's a really good place. We could probably go in there, you know. Um, and I went to see the librarian, and I chickened out, right? I
Yeah.
completely chickened out. I'm just like, no, I'm not going to do this. And so
Why?
anyway,
Why? Why chicken out? What was it that, I mean, look at everything that you've done,
I
pushed
know.
through, and then, meditation in the library was the thing that sort of was like, oh, no.
Yeah. I think I was, and this was early on in the piece too, and I think I was still trying to figure out, you know, whether me sort of wanting that was going to then, you know, cause some sort of repercussion, or they might, I don't
Yeah.
know, they
Yeah.
might
That,
test
well,
me.
that tentative, because you
Yeah.
tried being you up front, and that was the very thing, asking those questions that
Yes.
really, yeah, I hear
And
you.
then I
Yeah.
got
So
shut down.
recalibrating.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it was that same feeling. It's like, oh yeah, well, they're just going to tell me, you know, I'm stupid or I can't do it, or, you know.
Yeah.
So I chickened out and I walked around and I picked up this book, and it was the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which was
Mm.
rather interesting. And oh, okay, I'll just flick through this, just a bit of light reading. And anyway, the inside was a bookmark, and the
Uh-huh.
bookmark said, "Please turn over." So I turned the bookmark over, and it said, "The answer you're seeking is on page 73."
Had someone written this or?
Yes, yes. So I
Okay.
opened up to page 73, and it was about the importance of meditation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't not say now there's a sign.
No, no. So you know, so I did, and I think we did it for a couple of weeks, and you know, and it was great, but it was all part of that learning and that recalibrating, as you said, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and the one thing that I really learned was, and this is another ironic thing. The one thing that I really learned was about understanding the true I,
Yeah.
the true self, you
Yeah.
know. Around this time, Tanya had gone to India on a retreat, and the Swami that was very famous. I can't even pronounce. I'm not even going to go
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
who it was, but the retreat. He was famous for teaching about the true I.
Hmm.
So it was almost like this synergy of things that were happening. She's learning this over in India. I'm learning this here. You know, and it's
I
about being.
think hers was a little bit easier, Shane.
I would have liked to
Just
have
saying.
swapped.
No disrespect, Tanya, but but
Absolutely.
again, everyone's path is different, isn't it? We're all taken in different ways to ultimately learn
Yeah.
and become conscious of the same things
Yeah.
of truth. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So look through all of this, you know, I came out. I had a, you know, right new zest for life. Right, let's get ahead. Let's do this, and I started podcasting, and I caught up with the guy that I was actually inside with for 9 months, and I said, hey, we need to do a podcast,
Love
and
it.
so we did. Right
Yeah.
now, he turned out to be a real piece of work, and that's another story that I'm not even going to talk about. But
Another learning curve.
another learning curve.
Yeah.
You talk about narcissists that you let into your life. Well, there you go. There's one. But I look at it from the perspective of, well, it was a starting point.
Hmm.
So we started a podcast called the Bad Boys Podcast, and uh, it was great. We started it right when COVID was hitting.
Okay.
And we thought, okay, let's start this. It hadn't actually started at that point. Um, we said, right, we're going to try and push this, and so I did up a whole bunch of press releases, and I said the funniest podcast you've ever heard, blah blah blah, true story, blah blah blah. Got contacted by the Today Show, and they
Wow.
said, we want you on the show. Okay, great. So we went on the Today Show, and they wanted to know, like all the bits and pieces and the funny stories and that sort of stuff. And look, the way when we were talking on the podcast, it was very funny, and we rehashed some stories that were just hilarious. Um, and so it was a real sort of I guess cathartic
Hmm.
time for us to be able to do that and tell our story as well. Everybody loved it. 50,000 downloads, firstly because of the Today Show. Then Apple put it up onto New and Noteworthy,
Yep.
and it just went absolutely nuts. So we started doing our show every single day. And during COVID, because we were in lockdown, it's like, right, let's do it. So
Gives you
we,
something to do.
yep, we
Yeah.
changed the show. We called it the Bad Boys Breakfast Show.
Okay.
And we would literally go live, no script, nothing, just winging the whole thing. We wouldn't even know half the time what we were going to talk about. We'd just switch the mics on and away we would go.
I love it. I love
And
it.
it was gold. It
Yeah.
was gold. And as a result of that, I thought, because everyone says to me, you know, like, and I know, you've had conversations with me. At what point can I maybe, get a sponsor, or what point can I,
Yeah.
do something so that my podcast can become, a
Grow.
tool for my business, or grow, or, like
Yeah.
I want to, let's be honest, a lot of people want to make money from their podcast.
Yeah.
What can I do with this podcast? We do it every single day. At this point, we were up to about 300,000 downloads. Like, what can we do? So I sent out emails to every content producer in Australia,
Hmm.
every single one of them, and just said, introducing your new breakfast show. And we got phone calls from people saying, you know what? If we weren't in lockdown, and if we were able to have you, like, we would have you in a flash, you know.
Yeah.
And then we talk about inner voice of knowing.
Yeah.
Around this time, Tanya came home one day and said, I met this lady at the shop that she was working at. She said, I met this lady who she has a house on King Island. And she said, I just feel we need to go to King Island. And I went, what's a King Island? She said, I don't know. We'll find out.
But we got to go.
Okay. All right. So we booked a trip around Tasmania, and we went, from started in Launceston, we went right around and down the bottom, right across to the west coast. We did the whole of Tasmania in 10 days. And then we got to the north of Tasmania, and we went, right, let's go to King Island.
Hmm.
Now, during this whole trip, we're looking at everywhere, just going, oh my God, we could live here. It's so lovely, you know. Got to King Island. It was the worst place you'd ever want to go. It was terrible. And we're like, what, like, why did we come here? And Tanya said, I know why we came here, because we had to see the rest of Tasmania, right?
Ah.
That's
Yep.
why we came. That's
Yeah.
why.
Okay.
And so we got back from our trip, and we're like, wow, we could really move to Tasmania. Look, 5 years, let's give it 5 years. We'll wait until our youngest is, finished school and then
Hmm.
then we'll move. 3 months. 3 months time, we're
Yeah.
like, no, no, we got to go now. Like we just got to go, you know. We were hearing about lockdowns and like borders closing again, and we're like, you know what? Let's just go. We'll see what we can get. And so I reached out, and there was a job at the TV station in Launceston. And I went, all right, I can sell advertising. Let's do it. I knowing full well that what I wanted to do was radio.
Yeah.
So
A
I
stepping
accept
stone.
it's a stepping stone. So I
Yeah.
accepted this job, and then I get this phone call from this regional content producer who had been passed on my details because of the podcast. And he went, "Oh, you guys, you're so good. How would you like to be our new Brekkie team in Townsville?" And I just went, "No, I've been to Townsville. I don't
Uh-huh.
particularly like Townsville very much. I want to go to Townsville. I'm going the other way." And he went, "All right, well, if anything ever changes or, just keep in contact with me anyway." So off we went to Tassie. Tanya and Reef got here just, I think it was like 3 days before the borders closed. After that, they wouldn't have been able to come down. It would have been
Yeah.
another 2 months.
Yeah.
And 6 months into it, I just went, I think it's time. I've had enough of TV. I think it's time. So I contacted, that regional content director, and he
Hmm.
said, "Why don't you give the radio station a call in Launceston because I believe that they might be looking for someone."
Yeah. There you go.
And they were,
Yeah.
and they
There
were,
you go.
and I made the move.
I never knew that you had this background in marketing and,
Yeah,
all these experiences. No wonder you are so good at what you do, um, and with podcasting, because I know that you've got something about to launch.
I do.
And, I get, of course, because once you do a podcast, and what I loved about you is I'd been a co-host in a previous podcast, which is how I got to meet you. And then that had run its course. And that knowing inside of me was, you know what, that experience was great because it showed me. And I used to want to do a radio program. And then when I started that podcast, my husband said,
There it is.
especially when I started my own, here it is. Here's your radio program. So I thought, okay, that one's fulfilled in a slightly different way. And I remember the conversation with you, and then all these changes were happening. And it's like, well, everyone goes, it's so easy to do yourself. And I'm thinking, okay, so I'll do it myself. And you were great because you put no pressure on me at all. You just showed nothing but support. You did say, look, most people will then fizzle out. And the closer I got to having to do it on my own, the more the stress
Yeah,
built in, and I could feel all the tension. And
yeah,
it got to that point of, no, I'm not going to be able to do this because I've always said, and I had Dr. John D. Martini on not that long ago, and he says the same thing, delegate to those
yeah,
that are in the know. And I think I was actually in a phone conversation with you, and you're like, no, 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 that's okay, but do this and do that. And I put it down, and the tension grew even more. And I think I called you back within about 10 minutes and said, no, Shayne, I'm gonna continue with you. And everything just dropped away, because there is more to it than what people realize.
yeah,
And then, the consistency and how many times I've come to you with questions over things. And now I know how vast your experiences is. It makes sense to me.
yeah,
So I'm pretty excited for you to tell people about what you're launching, because I get approached a lot by people.
yeah,
And no disrespect to anyone else, there's clearly a resonance between us, but there is something with you, and now I know what it is, that you just have this roundedness of experience.
yeah.
Do you know, it's not just that you've been on radio and you podcast, but you've got the marketing background, you've got everything else, and you've got the heart and the spirit
Mm. And,
for it.
and I guess also if I had have not done my own podcast and not had the success from that podcast, which by the way is over 1 million downloads now.
Wow.
People still listen to it. I look at it and just go, It's so old. Why are you still listening to it? Because they find it and they listen to it. And I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to start again either.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
started a new podcast, did a great interview with Stuart Copeland from the Police, ended up with, a nomination for a radio award out of it. Like, don't be afraid to change and go, right, that's not working. I need to do this now.
Yes.
Don't be afraid
Yeah.
because this is that listening to your inner voice, right? If you don't listen to that inner voice, then maybe you're missing out on something that you really should be doing.
And that's so powerful that you say that. And, the whole time you were sharing these terrible things that have happened, like really challenging. And I think of the film that I'm in that comes out this year, The Gifts in Adversity. And you are a prime example of that. And listening to that inner voice and those instincts through what most people would feel broken and victimized in. And you've taken that whole history, and all I've heard is also the beauty that was in it
Yeah.
for you personally, internally. Do you know what I mean? And how it's shaped you, and the 9-month analogy and alchemy, and how you didn't let it break you. You didn't even let it change you
Wow.
in a negative sense, in an inverting sense. You stayed open and connected, and it doesn't surprise me the success and the synchronicities that you've been having since. Because, we talk about energy all the time on this podcast, and putting yourself, you were saying manifesting and, consciously crafting and creating, as I like to call it, but it's like keeping yourself in that expanded, open connection. And you did that.
I think it also comes down to like, yes, it is your attitude
Hmm.
towards, but not letting outside influences really affect you.
Yeah.
You probably know from watching TV shows that a guard, is referred to as a screw.
Yeah.
Not once, not once, not once during the podcast, not once when I was there did I ever call them a screw.
Mm,
They've got a job just as much as what everyone else has,
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to let my situation affect how I viewed them. Now, believe me, well, I saw what they did, and some of them probably deserved, to be called
But
that.
you're saying you didn't allow it, which means you made a really powerful choice,
Yeah, I
a
did.
really powerful
Yeah,
decision. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I did. I did.
So tell us about your, sorry, you were going to,
Yeah, no. So I was going to say, so I think with what I've launched and wanting to do, it really don't let your preconceived notions
hmm
affect. Like listen to that voice inside and go, okay, well, this is what I really want to do. So I've launched a podcast roadmap because a
hmm
lot of people, they start like this whole podcast journey and they go, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to do this, and then they'll start it and then they'll fizzle out and they'll go, oh, it's not working, it's not this, it's not that. It's because they haven't actually got a clear roadmap
yeah.
of where they need to go. Like they haven't compartmentalized it. So I've actually done that, and you'll be able to download that for free as well. We'll put the link on this.
Yes.
And the whole idea of it is about empowering you to create your first podcast in 30 days, create another 9 podcasts in 9 weeks. And once you've done that, it's like any habit.
Yeah.
Go through that process of 3 months. It's that incubation period. It's always 333, right? If you go through that 3 month period of incubation, by the time you get to that point, you've formed a habit.
Yeah.
You'll be like, right, well, this is just part of what I do now.
And nurturing and protecting that
Yeah.
creation,
Yeah.
like a new life.
Yeah.
you just don't hand it around for everybody. You don't tell everybody. You don't want, you protect. And it's like with the podcasts. I think too many people will suddenly start telling everybody they're going to do a podcast, and as you say, they don't yet have the roadmap. And then you've got all this other influence. I think it's
Yeah.
like, something like this nurtures you through,
Yeah.
setting down the roots and really establishing something that you can continue to grow with.
I read somewhere that with all the podcasts that launched during COVID, that only about, 10% of them continued on, which is sad, but I guess it's like, oh, well, I'm doing something while I'm in in lockdown because I've got nothing else to do. We're not in lockdown. This is a choice now for you to actually go, well, if I want to make podcast part of my marketing of what I'm doing, because we're doing social media, we're doing advertising, we're doing all of
Yeah,
this. Well, podcasts have become such a big thing. Let's have a listen to what you have to say. And the more times that they listen to what you have to say, the more they learn to trust you and get to know you.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
importance of the podcast.
And, the first guest that I reached out to, who I felt very nervous to ask because I really held them in high regard, bless her, it was the most amazing thing she did. She really hammered me with questions. Well, I felt hammered. She wasn't hammering me, but I felt like, because it was, why do you want to do this? And, all these sorts of questions. And luckily, I knew why I wanted to do it. And, where it's not just, oh, my inner voice of knowing told me to. I still had to know,
Yeah.
why. What was my intention behind even following that knowing?
Yes.
Um, and what I wanted it to create and be for me and be for listeners. And because I think a lot of people just can jump on the bandwagon too. And that's maybe where they fizzle out as well. Just, oh, I'll just do a podcast. It'll
You've
be
got you
easy.
Yeah, you've got to know who your audience is. You've got to know what your message is. You've got to know what your niche is. When I started doing Long Way to the Top podcast, I went, who can I talk to? And one of my first guests was Leo Sayer.
Ah,
And I
love
got,
him.
because I knew he had such a wonderful story and he was such an infectious guy. And we've become great friends since then.
Yep.
I've had him on several times. But it's knowing who your audience is, who and niching down as much as you can without it becoming so niche that it becomes a one hit wonder, right?
Yeah, no room to
You
move.
yeah,
Yeah.
you need to be able to move, but like you've got a thing that you always say, what's your inner voice of knowing?
Mm.
Um, I've got another client that does a Freedom CEO podcast, and she always says at the end, if you've got your own business, how does it feel to be the CEO of your own life?
Yeah.
You know, so it's like know what your niche is. So yeah, I'm happy to have a chat with you if you've got a podcast that you want to start. If you want to try and flesh out some idea, I can sit down and have a chat with you. And at the end of April, we're actually launching the Podcast Power Academy, where every week I'm going to go through a training of one of the 27 different steps that you've got in setting up a podcast, and getting really in depth to help you.
So this could be great too for people just starting out that are just sort of
Yeah.
like, oh, I just wanted to start a podcast and I started it, but where to from here, and realizing there's more to it than just
There
recording
it is.
them. So the listeners can download your roadmap
Yep. So the
and then,
roadmap's there to download, and
yeah,
then there's an offer to jump on a free 15-minute chat with me. We can have
yeah,
a bit of discovery, see if we're the right fit, and
yeah,
then from there, we can have a chat about either
the
doing
academy.
doing the academy or doing a one-on-one session or
Yeah.
using their podcast, like I help you with
The
yours.
the thing I've learned over all these years, and I didn't know that when I was younger, I was like, I could do it on my own. Um, is the more money that I've invested in myself with people that knew more than me in areas that I wanted to grow in and develop in. And I call it an investment because that's exactly what it is. We can flounder around and try to do this, or seek out people like you, for the support, for the education, share your knowledge. It's so well rounded, and then make a success of it. because you're nurtured through it as well,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
And look, you know what? Like I don't mind if you do it yourself or if you want me to help you do it. The fact is that everybody has a story to
Yeah.
tell. And if I don't tell my story, then how are people going to know what I've been through and or what the next person's been through? That's what a podcast is all about.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful letting like this is like I said, this is probably one of the first times I've really gone deep into that conversation. And
Well, thank you so much because in the way that you've shared the story, like I said earlier, Shayne, it is so evident. It's not like you're trying to teach us anything, but you are teaching us by the example of how you had faced, bankruptcy, courts, 100,000 to 200,000 prison. And that in itself is the biggest gift
yeah,
that you could give to someone in telling a story, not from the victim, but not even like you're trying to teach something, just demonstrating who you are, how you are, and how you moved through it, for me is incredibly powerful.
thank you.
And the respect that I've had for you even deepened. So thank you so much for sharing it on Inner Voice of Knowing. And and I can wholeheartedly say you are the most generous and authentic person in the field that I've ever come across with what you're doing and just as a human being. And I thank you for the support that you've shown me. And I know there are times where I've had to rush some recordings because I was traveling and this and that, and being able to come to you saying, I haven't had a proper time to listen. If there's something that's not good, please tell me, it's okay. And I love the fact that you go, yeah, of course I would. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Or,
Yeah.
positive feedback or any, but just knowing that I can trust you, that you've got my back
Yeah.
as a producer in my podcast as
Well,
well.
if you remember when you were in the other podcast, I said to you, I don't feel this is you. I
Yeah.
believe you've got a different story to tell. And,
Yeah.
you know, you said, yeah, I'm a shamanic coach. I'm not this other person. And I
And I
said, well,
knew I
that's what you
wasn't
need
that.
to do.
I knew I wasn't that, but it's
Yeah.
like, you were saying with you sometimes you cut cross paths with people for um, reasons deeper than you first realize.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when that just dissolved unexpectedly, I was left there going, huh, here's
That's
the
the
gift,
reason.
here's the gift, here's the gift,
Yeah.
and the confidence that it also gave me to go, well, yeah, now it's time for my authentic voice.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you nurtured me through that, saying, well, if you want to do it on your own, Kaye, look, this is what I can recommend. And
Yeah.
never felt forced or anything. But the relief when I finally rang you back and said, no, I'm so sorry. I rang you 5 minutes earlier, but no, I need you to produce this for me and take away that, my focus needed to be elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Well,
So
look, thank
everyone,
you as well for, giving me the opportunity to have a chat with you on the show. And when someone else said, "Oh, do you want to have a chat?" And you're like, "No, no, no, no. You got to be a guest on my show first. Don't you dare."
love it. Love it. And I think people are going to really need to hear this story quite a few times because I know I'm going to, but there's so much already that I've gone, oh my God, there is so much in that will feed me
Yeah.
and deepen me.
Yeah.
And for anyone that's feeling like they're a bit challenged at the moment, let's get some perspective because unless it's like this, you know, it
Mm.
ain't that big. You
No.
know, if Shayne Brian can go through all of that and come out the other side and have all these synchronicities and all this wonderful stuff happen, even, and kudos to your beautiful wife and your family for just being there and holding space as well. But thank you for sharing. All the links will be there. And yeah, if you are keen to improve your podcast or feeling like you're floundering or just want to start one, I can highly recommend at least having a chat with Shayne Brian.
Thank you, Kaye. Been a pleasure. See you later.
Bye.